Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. That sweet melodic voice you heard earlier was Dawn Rich Creek, our Director of Marketing for Condusiv Technologies. My name's Dan Sullivan. I happen to be the RVP for the Eastern region. And again, welcome and thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day here to hear about our Velocity I/O reduction software, which we have customers seeing 2x and greater performance improvements, not only in SQL, but on a great many of their Windows applications. So we're going to get started and dig right into it. We spared no expense today to bring you our Condusiv Senior Vice President of Technology Strategy, Gary Kwan, AKA known as GQ. So GQ, are you there?
I am here, Dan, and glad to join you here. Don't let Dan fool you. He's very technically minded, but I'm here to help out with the deep dive questions if needed here, and also keep the sales honest too.
And you always do, GQ, and I appreciate that. So thank you. GQ mentioned an important element to our discussion today, and that is all of your questions as we go along. So there's a Q&A box for you to enter in your questions. No, please, no question is a bad one. GQ and I I've had the fortune to work with him on a number of these webinars, and we have a fantastic set of questions usually during the webinar and then after. So again, please don't hesitate to write in your questions in the Q&A box.
And just make it to all presenters so we can all see it. And don't confuse it with the chat box. So do it with the Q&A, please. Thanks, Dan.
You see, folks, just as GQ said before, he just keeps me honest in this whole presentation. So thanks, GQ. In addition, for attending this webinar this afternoon, after the webinar is over, you'll be receiving a free, not for resale copy of our Velocity software, a per VM version. It's a $525 value that you'll be getting. So we're very excited, obviously, for you to get the software, install it, run it in your environments, and see the benefits that our patented I/O reduction software can deliver for you. So with that, let me give you a little bit here about Condusiv. You may know us, and you may have actually used our products before. We used to be the Disk Keeper Corporation. We've been in business 37 years. We're the second oldest software company in the world. And by the way, GQ, of those 37 years, how many years have you been with Disk Keeper / Condusiv?
Oh, just about 30 or 35 years. So just a little while, Dan.
No, it's a pretty amazing run that GQ has had. So, and he's helped develop and move all of the different iterations of our software along through those years. We talked about the Disk Keeper, the product, and you may have known it as the preeminent disk defragmentation software in the industry, and we sold over 100 million copies of Disk Keeper worldwide. But in 2012, the world turned upside down. Virtualization appeared on the scene. You no longer defrag an SSD or a SAN. And so with that, GQ and his team totally respun our software, and we changed our name from Disk Keeper Corporation to Condusiv, because no longer did our patented I/O reduction software defrag any devices, but through GQ and his team, we now prevent fragmentation from occurring in the Windows OS, and therefore present the most efficient I/O possible for your backend storage and your network to deal with. As a result of doing that, customers see anywhere from at least 30% reduction in I/O to their backend storage, which results, and by our customers' actual results, anywhere from a 50 to a 300% reduction and improvement in performance on a variety of different Windows applications. So just an incredible result that our folks have seen. Because of that, Gartner named us a cool vendor and said we should be installed in every virtualized initiative. Besides the ability to reduce in I/O, GQ and the team also added a patented caching engine to our solution. It caches hot reads, and GQ will talk more about it later on, using idle and available DRAM. Fully automated, nothing for you to do. And because it's so smart and so efficient, very different than most caching engines, folks that you see here like HP, Dell, Lenovo, Western Digital, they all OEM'd that patented caching engine, renamed it, of course, and put it into their laptops and workbooks. And you can appreciate the testing that they put that caching engine through before they would put their name on it and put it in their devices. So pretty amazing, and GQ will talk more about that later. Because of what we do in a Windows environment, we've been a longtime partner with Microsoft. Because of the value we bring to a virtualized environment, longtime partner with VMware. And most recently, through GQ and his team, we certified under the Microsoft SQL Server I/O Reliability Certification. GQ, you want to talk briefly about that certification?
Sure, Dan. And I consider this a nice elite certification. Microsoft has these types of levels of certification to make sure that third-party applications or tools like ourselves are fully compatible with their server types or application, in this case, server. And not only do we have in testing, we have also had to go against board of experts at Microsoft. And like you can consider this nice certification here. Now, we're the first software vendor to get this certification, but we're in good company with hardware vendors like HP, EMC, Dell. So it just shows how well we work with them. Thanks, Dan.
Absolutely, and congratulations again, GQ, to you and your team on doing so. So, with that, folks, we've been doing surveys for a number of years for IT professionals. And one of the questions we ask and the results that we get back are, as you can see there, are you experiencing sluggish performance? And interestingly enough, the number has actually grown over the last few years. We just completed a new survey. It's actually on our website. But over 28% of the organizations responded that SQL performance is an issue for them. So glad to have you join us here today to learn how we can help you improve the performance of that and all your other Windows applications. Believe it or not, 7 out of 10 new customers buy us, and buy us our I/O reduction, patented I/O reduction software to boost their SQL performance. So pretty impressive what we do in the SQL environment. Now, what you're seeing here is the most efficient I/O environment possible. So you have large contiguous writes emanating out of the Windows OS, moving down through the hypervisor, down to your backend storage, and back again. And this depicts a virtualized environment. We also work in physical server environments too. And while virtualization has been great for server efficiency, it's been horrendous for I/O performance. And GQ, I wonder if you could talk to the folks about the two elements that really kill performance in a virtualized environment.
And Dan, be glad to. But as Dan is showing right now, this is kind of a worst case scenario where you're getting all these random IOs coming from each VM, and then as it goes through the hypervisor, then it gets scattered and randomly, and you get this effect that was termed by Gartner and ourselves called the IO blender effect. So now all these IOs, random IOs, are coming down there, and they get scattered, and they're not being handled in order. And one thing that you may look at is whenever you buy storage, they give you two benchmarks. They give you random I/O and sequential I/O benchmarks. And you'll notice, and this is for hard disk drives or SSDs, all flash arrays, you'll always notice that the sequential I/Os always outperform the random I/O. So not only do the nice sequential I/Os give better performance gains, going through the bandwidth there, but you're also getting the best performance out of your storage by providing it with sequential I/O. Now, why is this occurring? Well, first of all, there's this Windows I/O tax. On Windows happening on the virtual machines or physical machines, Windows tends to break up I/O rather than sending a nice sequential I/O. And the reason it does that is that the Windows file system, when a file gets created or extended, it doesn't know how big it's going to be or how large that extension is going to be. And so on the machine, and this is all on the logical level on the Windows OS there, it looks for the next allocation on that volume, on that logical volume. Now that next allocation, in most cases, is not big enough to contain that file creation or extension. So when it fills up that, it has to find another allocation on that logical volume. And when it does that, that's another I/O. So it tends to break up that I/O. And then as you then serve all those random I/Os down the hypervisor, you get this I/O blender effect because you're getting all these small random I/Os coming in at different times, and it's trying to handle all those. So that's what's causing that, Dan.
Great. Thanks, GQ. And folks, in this example, it may take 100,000 I/Os to write a gigabyte of data. With our I/O optimization software, it may take 50 or 60,000 I/Os. So you can just intuitively think that, if we can reduce that amount of I/O to your backend storage, what may happen from a performance standpoint. And everybody's different. Everybody's application is different, but you should see a significant benefit. So where do we sit? So we're two light filter drivers sitting in the Windows OS. So if it's compatible with Windows, it's compatible with us. And so we're above everything in your environment. Hypervisor, HBAs, servers, network, storage, etc. We're sitting in the OS, telling Windows don't break up those writes into small fragments, keep them large and contiguous. And the patented caching engine is caching hot reads so they never even take the trip down your storage and back again. So hopefully this gives you an idea of where we sit within the OS. And really, at the end of the day, as GQ and I both spoke about, what we're delivering are just large, contiguous writes and more payload with every I/O operation. We talked about the patented caching engine, and GQ will talk about that a little bit more. But again, it uses idle and available DRAM, and it does it all automatically. There's nothing for you to do in order for the caching engine to deliver its benefits. GQ and his team developed a dashboard to actually show you what the software is doing for you. Years ago, we trademarked the set it and forget it moniker. We beat the Ronco chicken guy to that because we are just set it and forget it software. As I mentioned, all fully automated. But people would then ask, well, if everything's running better, but what's your software really doing? We'll share with you what the dashboard looks like. GQ, do you have a comment?
No, I'll go in a little more detail when we talk about the technology here.
Okay, great. Thanks. And folks, as you see there, we guarantee to solve your performance issue, or no harm, no foul, you'll get your money back. So I mentioned these two patented filter drivers. I'm going to let GQ, the father of the filter drivers, talk to you about it.
Well, the first one here is what we call IntelliWrite. And as I indicated before, Windows tends to break up I/O into small random I/O. And as an analogy, if you're going to carry a gallon of water from one place to another, would you do it with 100 Dixie cups or just do it one trip with one big gallon bucket? And that's what we're trying to enforce here. And I will tell you, a lot of people think, oh, you must be caching those writes and holding on to them and then write it all in one big piece. And many people says, well, isn't that a little dangerous? And that is dangerous, and we are not doing that. What we are actually doing is very simple and safe too. We are actually monitoring your traffic in the background. So we know when a certain file type or a certain application, when it creates or extends a file, we have a good idea how big that file is going to be. We feed that intelligence back to the Windows NTFS file system. So when the file system looks for the allocation, rather than just finding the next allocation, it's finding the best fit allocation. And by doing that, now when it writes out that data, it has allocation to write all that data out in one big piece rather than saying, oh, fill that one, I got to go fill another one up. And what that results in is a nice sequential I/O. Very simple, very safe. And that's our IntelliWrite technology there. The other technology and that one helps with the write performance. It also helps with the read performance too, because when you read that same data back, it's in one single logical place. It can be read back in a single I/O too. Sorry, Dan, I'm making you go back and forth. Now we can go to our caching technology. And we call this our IntelliMemory technology. And it's unique in two ways. And I have to mention this too. And Dan indicated that, our technology is licensed by OEMs. In fact, 9 of the top 10 OEM PC manufacturers license our caching technology. Yeah, you don't hear about us because they license under their name, but it kind of tells you how unique and how far ahead our technology is from others when they're licensing it. And here's the reason for it. One is how we use RAM to do the caching. You do not have to go and say, I need to allocate this much RAM for caching. We do it dynamically. We're going to see what memory is available on your system and only use that for the caching. Now, if any user or system process comes in and says, I need memory, we automatically give it up. So there's never any memory contention issue. So part of that set and forget it. You put it on there, we'll just use what's available. Now, at the same token, if there's no memory available, of course, we won't do any caching. And in a couple slides, we'll talk about how SQL tends to use all the caching and some best practices. Now, the second part is how we decide what to put in cache and what to keep in cache. A lot of caching products out there, they see, oh, this data was just read in. So let me put that into the cache and hope that gets read in again. We're not doing that. We're actually monitoring the system in the background to see what data is actually basically hot data. What data is getting accessed the most? And that's the first criteria. The second criteria we then look at is what data, if we're to cache, would give the best performance back to your system. Because we have found out that it's not, if we were to cache all these small, noisy I/O, so preventing it from having to go down to storage to get completed, Well, that gives you better performance gains than trying to cache those nice large sequential I/O. So we're doing two things here. As I said, we're looking at what data is gain access the most, and then what data, if we cache it, will give you the best benefits. And what this does is, since we reside right there on that Windows virtual machine or physical machines, when that application creates that I/O request, we can satisfy it right there. And that prevents that I/O having to go through the network down to the storage to get satisfied. Now, you can see how that really cut down on the latency time because we'll get that done very quickly. But it also cleared up that bandwidth to that network storage for other systems to use that network storage too. So there's several benefits from that.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan. And I do see some good questions coming from the users here, and we'll get to those shortly too. And keep those coming in. Some of these are good. Thanks.
That's great. No, thanks, GQ. And again, folks, as you all know, DRAM is 10 to 15 times faster than anything on the planet. So again, thinking of SQL as a read-intensive application, if we can have some DRAM to use in our intelligent cache, GQ explained, and I'm sure you all know about the potential benefits to you, and that's what our customers see, and we'll show you some examples about that in coming up here. So we talked about, the dashboard that GQ and his team built, and this is just a screenshot, of one of the examples. You can see here that it talks about the total IOs that have been eliminated, and then the read and the write IOs that have been eliminated out of that total, and what percentage of the read and write IOs that have been eliminated since, let's say the last 3 weeks here, as it shows here. The dashboard background then takes those IOs being eliminated times your average latencies to give you a storage IO time saved. So as GQ talked about, without these IOs having to go down to storage, we're saving you storage IO time. In addition, it'll share with you the fragments prevented and eliminated, free space is consolidated, and as you can see up here in that black band, there are other tabs that we could look at that talk about read-write ratios, memory utilization, a 24-hour analytics tab that monitors 13 different IO metrics. So there's a lot of information that's being delivered to you here through the dashboard that GQ and his team have put together. So really very helpful in seeing what the software is doing for you. So we talked about some of the customer results. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can read them more quickly than I can speak, but look down here at Bell Mobility. Bell Mobility is the Verizon of Canada. They installed our software and reduced IO to their SAN by 61%, which resulted in 3x faster SQL queries. ASL Marketing, batch imports dropped by 15 hours by just installing our software. And look at Creative Office. Response time for SQL and other Windows applications, 90% faster. Just, incredible results in it. And they go on, and we have case studies on our website, et cetera, to share those with you. But at the end of the day, we're excited to give you the software to try, because what really matters is what happens in your environment and with your applications. So we're excited about getting to that. A few more customer examples. Again, I'll let you read most of these, but I will just mention the University of Illinois, 50,000 students in Champaign-Urbana. They were a Diskkeeper customer. They virtualized. They put in all brand new hardware, Dell 730 servers, 768 gigabytes of RAM, and all flash compellent backend in their facilities and services group. So this is not the big data center at the university, but it's a good size data center managing all the work orders across the university. They have their own power plant, they build their own furniture, and they had one database that managed all the card swipes of the 50,000 students in the dormitories, food halls, and bookstore. So look at this. This is the result of after 72 hours. Before they installed Velocity on this all-flash, big server environment, it took 4.5 hours to process 1.5 petabytes of data, and that generated 13.9 million IOs to their brand new flash storage. 72 hours later, after installing Velocity, that same report went from 4 hours down to 1.5 hours. And in that 1.5 hours, they processed an additional 0.5 terabyte of data. And look at the amount of IO reduction from previous 48 hours, 13.9 million to 2.7. Just stunning. And they were really surprised because they had put in all this brand new hardware, and they were really happy with what they were getting before. And the IT director told me, Dan, this is really great because what you've given me now is additional headroom in this environment. I spent all my money on the hardware, but you've given me all this additional headroom. I can now add more applications to this existing environment without having to add more hardware. And by the way, I can't afford it. So again, just one example after another of the benefits that our patented IO reduction software has been delivered. But again, what's really important is what can it do for you, and that's why we're happy to get it into your hands. Now, GQ mentioned that there are a number of different ways to also best practice and improve your SQL performance. GQ, you want to chat about these for a bit?
Sure. The one thing is, do you have enough DRAM on your system? Is there enough available DRAM? We'll just use what's available there. But if it's possible, if you could add additional DRAM, so there's 4 to 16 gigabytes of available memory, that would help. Not required, but it could help. Now, one thing I talked about SQL, when you install when you have a SQL server, what you'll see is it will try to load all its databases into memory. And even though some of those databases aren't even getting access, so that memory is not being used very well there, very ineffective. And it leaves, in many cases, it leaves none left for us to use. So what we tend to recommend is to limit the amount of memory SQL uses. Give us 4, give us 8, and maybe 16 gigabytes of memory for us to use our caching technology to help with the performance gains. Now, we did some in-house testing ourselves, and we had outside lab by doing a SQL and limiting it, and we saw in some cases up to 60 to 70% increase in transaction rates just by doing that. So one thing you want to look at when you run a SQL server is how much available memory there is, and if there's none left, to limit SQL. And you can contact your sales reps or SE over on our side, and they will reference you some knowledge-based articles from Microsoft on limiting the SQL memory. Very easy to do. And then the last thing is, go ahead, Dan, on the dashboard. I'll let you do that one.
No, well, thanks, GQ. So you saw the dashboard results before. As I mentioned, if we're, by looking at those, you can tell how we're doing. And as you can see here, if we're doing less, I said 30 to 50%. I said 30% is on average what we do. So if you're getting, less than 50%, adding a little more memory, again, faster than anything else on the planet, with a read-intensive environment, you can really crush performance and improve, the I/O efficiency in your environment. So really, what are the next steps? It's really pretty simple. We're going to be sending you the NFR copy of the software. believe it or not, folks, again, GQ and his team, broke the barrier here. There is no reboot required to install the software in the OS. We released that back last April, and both our new installs and upgrades have just gone flawlessly across, hundreds and hundreds of customers. So truly amazing, GQ, what you and your team accomplished. But folks, the longest time it takes you to install is to download the software. It then just installs in minutes, and you're off to the races. And give it a day or two or three, and then take a look at your dashboard to see what kind of results you're getting. And if you would like, we are also very happy to give you a host license and install it across all the VMs on a specific host or hosts. And the reason for that, and it's very important if you think about it, that let's say there's 7, 10 VMs on a host. We could install in one or two of those VMs and optimize the I/O on those two VMs. But then you've got 8 other VMs that have all of that random I/O traffic that GQ demonstrated to you earlier, really taking away from all the performance gains that you're getting on the other 2 VMs that you've optimized with our software. So a, quote, host license covers all the VMs on that host. It could be 7, it could be 14, it could be 20 plus, but that one license covers all of those. And or we have a per VM and or per physical server license. Those are basically both the same that you can do. But we're happy to work with folks, and we do it all the time, to do a much bigger than a single VM trial across and in their environment. So again, very happy to work with you to do all of that. So, with that, GQ, you said that there's some questions going on here, so why don't we get to some of those?
Good point, Dan. I just want to point out 2 things. One is, again, the importance of making sure on a SQL Server there's available memory for us to use, if not limiting it. The second part is, and Dan indicated this, is getting you to install on all VMs on that same host. Now, that's not required, but and you could just put it on one of the VMs and get performance gains. But there's other systems on that VM where you're also getting that same IOs going through. So you want to try to optimize all the VMs on that same host if you can. That's not always possible, but that's ideally what you would do. So you optimize the IOs on all that bandwidth going through the same host there. Okay. Thanks, Dan. And yeah, let's get to the questions here. Bahadar, he starts off with, does this software work with Windows OS only? Yes, it does. Right now, we currently just works on the Windows OS. Anywhere we start with, on the server versions or the client versions here. And let's see. Theodore says, is this compression? No, it's not compression, Theodore. And I know you did this early, but it's basically, as I said, optimizing the Windows file system so the writes are more efficient, and then the caching. So in both of those cases, we talk about I/O reduction, and we're really reducing the IOs having to go to storage, because now there's less random write IOs going through there because there's nice sequential IOs, and of course the read IOs. Now if we can satisfy those in cache, we just prevent them having to go down to the storage. And one of the benchmarks besides our dashboard, and I should mention our dashboard, when you do that IO time saved, this is really the IO time saved on your system. where we reside, we can measure the latency time. So we know that when we prevent an I/O having to go down the storage, how much I/O time is saved. So that really shows what on your system there. Okay. Now, for instance, here's another benchmark some people do. They look at the the amount of I/Os having to go down to their storage infrastructure, their SAN, and they'll see that it decreased quite a bit, not only from just from this system, so that increases the bandwidth for that SAN. But at the same time, they look at the workload or the amount of data being read and write on that system, and it's increased. So just because you can get more work done. So there's another way of doing that benchmark. And Suresh asks a good question. What if the logical volume is sized reasonably? And Suresh, I'm thinking you're thinking about sizing the cluster size on that logical volume. And that does help, but doesn't prevent it. You're still going to have that issue, but it does help. But at the same time, if you increase the cluster size too big, you're going to be wasting size of your volume too, of course. For instance, let's say you have a huge cluster size and you write up a small piece of data. It still now it has to allocate that large cluster size. But good question. And then for you, Dan, Badar asks, is it possible to get copies of the slides to share with team members?
Absolutely. Great question, and thanks for that. And we'll get the copy of the slides out probably a little bit after we send out those NFR copies of the licenses.
And then he has another question that I'll direct to you. How does licensing work? Is it per VM or physical server?
Sure. So as I may have mentioned, afterwards when you asked the question, and thank you for that, we have both a host license, so all the VMs on that host, and we have a per server, a per VM license for virtualized environments, per server for physical environments. And the break even is around 7 VMs for a host license. So 7 or more VMs on a host, you're better off doing the host license.
And Chuck asked, do you have any case studies or insight on installing on a SCCM environment? Chuck, honestly, I have to go check, and I'll check with Dan, see if we do have actual case studies on there. But I know we've had people use SCCM with our products here.
And I think you've even written some scripts to help people do that, GQ, or some are available.
Yes, we did that in SCOM. You are correct.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Jeff asked, would this be installed on the SQL Server? And yes, and I'll Jeff, it does get installed on the SQL Server. And I'll address a few other questions here. It says, another person asked, does it get installed on the host or the guest? We get installed on the guest running the Windows OS. And the reason for that is where the applications are creating the I/O. So if we can optimize the I/O right there, for instance, cache it right there, we're preventing any that I/O having to go down toward any in network or anything else to get satisfied. We'll satisfy it right there. Okay.
And folks, no reboot. Just boom, install. You're done.
And and this is Badar has another question. A software for Linux, Oracle DBS. Now, we have been talking about SQL here, but this software, it's agnostic to the applications. It will work on other DBs as like Oracle DBS. It doesn't have to just be a database server. We work fine on, and we have a lot of people getting great results on file servers, Exchange servers, Outlook. So even though this session is about SQL, it's agnostic. because we're just looking at the data coming in and say, how can we best optimize this data for that Windows system here? Jeff asked, how much config is involved? Well, Jeff, I like to say it's fully set and forget it. But as indicated, sometimes there are some configuration needs to be done, especially on a SQL server where there's no memory left over for caching. And that is where I indicated may have to limit the amount of memory SQL is using to allow us to use some to get the benefits.
But really the rest is fully automated, GQ. There's really nothing to do.
That's true. We will automatically run. We'll see what data needs to be optimized. Memory, we'll just use what's available there. And we'll dynamically, and if as I said, if the user or a system process needs it, we dynamically give it back up so there's no memory contention issue. So that's very good there. Now, I like this next question from Manuel. In a cloud environment, how can this help? There's limited or no control on other VMs running on the host machine. And you're absolutely right. This is one of the cases where you may not be able to run it on every VM on that host. So you'll only be able to run it on your VM because you don't know what other VMs are running on that host unless you have it set up with your vendor that you have a dedicated host. But you may not know what other VMs are running that host. So you can just install it on your VMs and it will get that optimization for your VM there. Okay. Suresh, just a question. He says, LRU doesn't work? And LRU, I'm assuming he's referring to, the least recently used type of caching. And Suresh, that does help. But, when we were developing our caching, we tried different types of methodologies, including LRU. And we just did not, find that just using LRU was giving the best performance gains back. So, as I said, we kind of took that twofold approach. Not only look at what data is getting used the most, but also what data gets the best performance back if you were to cache it. So that's what we have there.
Yeah, so GQ and his team, they're looking at, as he said, what really degrades performance, and the engine's so smart that it sees those, and that's what it puts into cache for you.
Yep. And Manjo, he has another follow-up question here. How much time does our data remain in cache? If the data becomes, and for some reason, it's getting cut off here. But let me just give you an indication here.
I think it's dirty, if it becomes dirty.
Dirty. Okay, thanks, Dan. For some reason, it got cut off on my system here. If data becomes dirty, which means that data got written over, it gets flushed out of that cache right there. Now, how much time does the data remain in cache? It depends on how much data is available on there. If the data is available and no other data has come in that is, let's say, getting hit more and also getting better performance gains, it just may stay in there. Now, of course, if a system process or a user process comes in and needs to allocate memory and we have to give it up, that data will get flushed out because we have to give back that memory. So it all depends on what other data may give better performance gains back to the user, and also how much memory you have. Now, Don says we have clusters. Each node is on a different host. That's, Don, this is okay for us technically because we're running on each individual node. I know you said it's on a different host, but that's okay. We'll just run on each individual node there. And Sunny says, we use both SQL database and the file server files on Windows Server. How does Velocity ensure data integrity and no data loss in the process? And then would application accessing non-SQL files based on databases require special development? Good question, Sunny, and let me take the first one about data integrity and no data loss. First of all, as I indicated, we are not doing any write caching. All our caching is read-only, and that means that data that's in our cache is already on your storage. So let's say the system goes down, and the memory and the data in the cache in the memory, of course, it's not there. It's still on it's already on your storage. So there's no data integrity issues. That is our number one goal when we were developing this. So, and no data loss in that process. Now, would applications accessing non-SQL files based on databases require special development? No. As I indicated before, we're kind of agnostic. We are agnostic to the applications. We're just looking at data, on that volume and seeing what data is getting hit the most and what data would, if we're to cache, would give you the best benefits. And data files coming down to get written out, for the Accelerate technology, we're not looking at where it comes from. We're just saying, here comes a file coming down, and how can I do that? And I am getting a few questions. Some of these guys had a hard stop at 12:30. I understand that, and appreciate the rest of you sticking with us past the 12:30 mark so we can get through there. And Darius says he apologized, had a hard stop, but he'll contact you if he needs more information. Then Jacob says, how can we access the NFR version not expiring? As soon as Dan, go ahead and tell them how they'll get access to the NFR version.
Yeah, we're going to send you a link to the license. So you click it, download it, and you're ready to go.
Okay, and they'll get that email after this session, correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Then Dan, and maybe you can help me read this one because it's getting cut off. I can read the first sentence. If I understand correctly, this application optimized traffic. Do you have? And I can't read the rest of it, Dan.
And I can't get to that one, GQ.
You couldn't get that one either. Okay. I apologize, Dan. Usually I had this trouble before with WebEx. Then Don says, does it make sense to install on one SQL node of a cluster? Now, Don, you may want to install it on both nodes of the clusters. It depends how much you're failing over. And the sales reps here can work with you on licensing on a cluster environment. And then Pana J says, how and when is a cache deleted? Is it a secure delete? Now, cache can get deleted in several ways. Of course, you disable the caching, and it will just remove that cache, give that memory back to the system here. Or, of course, if a write comes in, it's going to flush out that part of the cache. Now, secure delete, I will have to get back to you on that, on how much it overwrites that data when it gives up that memory right there. But this isn't user memory here. This is non-paged pool memory of the system. So this is not data that regular users can access. This is only memory that privilege. You'd have to have a system privileges to get access to them. And does this work well with SharePoint? And it does, Jacob. A good question there. We've had that.
Yeah, Jacob, SharePoint, Exchange, file servers, domain controllers, anything that's dealing with a lot of I/O in a Microsoft environment, we just rock.
And I'll read this question, Dan, but I think you'll be able to answer this one here. We use HPE Nimble as our SAN, which uses their CASL technology to do
the Castle, yeah.
Would we actually gain anything from the software installed on the hosts? But actually,
go ahead.
Go ahead. We will get installed on the, as I said, the guests. But I'm going to refer this to Dan because we have some good case studies with Nimble.
Well, that's really what I was going to say, GQ, is exactly. So we have a couple case studies on the website where Nimble is the back end, but again we're up in the OS, both optimizing writes and caching reads that don't even go to Nimble. So by presenting the Nimble pure file in, extreme I/O, et cetera, but by presenting any environment with the most efficient I/O possible, everything just runs faster. It makes that flash storage faster.
Yep. Thanks, Dan. And I just want, I know we're getting close to an hour. We got a lot of good questions. This is a great group here, Dan. So let me go quick on these. Edward, on existing DBs, does it in effect defrag the DB to increase serial reads? Now, Edward, there's two things. There's the internal defrag of the databases, the data's within the database. We don't do that. We may look at the whole database itself to make sure it's contiguous. Now, as Dan indicated, we're preventing that database from getting fragmented further, but we still have our defrag in there for existing fragmentation, that database. So if that database file is very fragmented and it's causing performance issues, then we will look at, it will automatically try to defragment that database if it already exists. Will host licenses work on VMware hosts? Yes, that will work fine there, Chuck. Then Frank, how are software updates for Condusiv handled? Right now, we will give you the updates, and you can just apply them yourself. We don't do the automatic updates ourselves where you can say, go and automatically do it. We'll provide those updates and inform you of them too. The software has the ability to go and check for updates and inform you. So you can do it there. John, who does caching refresh when the underlying data changes? And you're right, John. In our caching, we will detect when writes come through and change that data. So as soon as the writes come through, we know that caching data has to be refreshed right at that point there. And then Chris says, you say install this across all VMs on the same host, but what if they are hosted in a cloud like Azure? And I think I answered that before. You're right, Chris. We don't have control over that, and neither do you. I mean, in the cases where you get them to have a dedicated host, you do, but that's ideal scene to be able to do it on all VMs on that same host. But you're right, we don't always have that control. So you just put it on the VMs you do have and get that benefit there. And would it have the same effect? It will have, you still get the performance gains of, the caching and Telluride on there. The only thing that you don't get is the decrease in that bandwidth of, the storage on that network storage there, because there's still other people hitting that storage there, but it increases yours though. Eric, host license, oops, let me get here. Host license versions still need the application installed on individual VMs, right? And yes, you get a host license, but yes, the application still gets installed on the individual VM. Suresh, is there anything Microsoft is doing to improve the optimizer? Not, actually, you're talking to the guy that wrote the original optimizer for Microsoft. Wasn't called optimizer, it's called the built-in defragmenter for them. They're not doing this data to prevent it or caching right now, and I know no plans of them doing it here. Farouk, what kind of overhead are we talking about on this application? And extremely little, Farouk. Sales wants me to say zero, but honestly, there is a little bit overhead. But we tend to do everything in the background. All our for existence, when we determine what to put in cache and keep in cache, that's all done as a background task. Everything, in fact, is we do something besides just making us run at lowest thread priority. Any processing we do, and something we call invisitasking, we go and check what the CPU usage and what is on the I/O queue. And if there's something on there, we go and say, let's wait a while, and let's go and come back again and see what's happening there. So, and everything else is like the filter driver. We'll check the I/O to see if it's in cache and just satisfy it there. So very little. So to answer your question, very, very little overhead on this. And then Badar, I think we got about 6 more questions, maybe 10. If encryption is used, any adverse effect? No. We're just looking at data. There's a block of data. If it's encrypted, that's okay. Edward, if you have a host license and you migrate the VM to a different host, and I can't read the rest of it.
How does it affect your software?
Okay. Doesn't affect our software, but you'll have to change that. You'll have to move that host license over to that other host there. And let's see. Any application that optimizes a DB. We're not doing optimization within the internal DB, Dan. We're just the data IOs that going to and from that DB. We're optimizing it. Eric, I like this one. Any performance improvements to VDI desktops? Yes, and we got some good case studies for VDIs. So we can look at helping you there. Panajay, and he has a hard stop, just says thank you. I think that's it, Dan. We reached it, and we're a minute before the hour here. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us here as we answer all. These were great questions. Great group.
Absolutely, GQ. And again, thanks, everybody. So as I mentioned, you'll get an email with the link to the download for the NFR copy. Again, we meaning the Condusiv sales and SE team, are here to A, answer any questions, B, to work with you on your environment. And if you want to do a host license, again, which we recommend, if there are a number of VMs on that host, we're happy to provide you with that and work through that with you. So folks, thanks very much. We'll also get you a copy of the presentation. Again, any questions, let us know. Look forward to working with you. Have a great rest of the day, and I hope you enjoy 2x better SQL performance with our software.
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
everybody. See ya.